A group of strange tourists arrived in town. They were dressed in identical robes and were very quiet. Sometimes silence is more frightening than loud screams. Peppa and her friends watched them with curiosity. The tourists gathered in the main square and whispered something in unison. Children's curiosity knows no bounds. They drew strange symbols on the ground. One of them looked very much like Labubu's sinister smile. Some signs are better left unseen. Every day, more and more tourists arrived. They flocked to the city from all directions. Evil attracts its own kind. The townspeople began to feel an inexplicable anxiety. The air became heavy and oppressive. A premonition of trouble is rarely wrong. One night, Peppa woke up to a strange humming sound. It came from the street where all the tourists had gathered. Night is the time for the most terrible secrets. They stood in a circle and called out to someone. Their voices merged into one monotonous, frightening sound. The collective mind can be dangerous. A dim fire burned in the center of the circle. In its flames, shadows flickered, resembling Labubu. Fire can not only warm, but also frighten. Peppa got scared and woke up her parents. But they just waved her away, saying it was just a dream. Adults don't always believe in children's fears. The next day, things started disappearing in the town. First small things, then more valuable ones. Chaos starts small. The police were baffled. No one could figure out who was behind the thefts. Sometimes the answers are right in front of you. Peppa knew it was the work of the cultists. She had seen them carrying things to their camp. Children's powers of observation can be very sharp. She decided to follow them. At night, when everyone was asleep, she quietly left the house. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the fight against it. The cultists had gathered at an old abandoned house. They were piling the stolen things into one big heap. Evil likes to settle in abandoned places. They began their ritual again. This time their voices were louder and more confident. The power of faith can be destructive. Dark smoke began to rise from the pile of things. It thickened, taking the form of a huge figure. Some things are better left unsummoned into our world. It was Labubu. He appeared in all his terrifying glory. Evil always comes when called. The cultists greeted him joyfully. They sacrificed everything they had stolen to him. The price of worship can be very high. Labubu surveyed the crowd with his icy gaze. His eyes stopped on Peppa, who was hiding in the bushes. There is no hiding from the all-seeing eye. He smiled his creepy smile and reached out to her. Peppa froze in terror. Fear paralyzes and deprives of will. The next morning, Peppa was not found in her bed. She had simply disappeared. Some disappearances remain a mystery forever. Her parents were in a panic. The whole town searched for her, but to no avail. Losing a child is the most terrible grief. The cultists had also disappeared. They left as quietly as they had arrived, leaving no trace. Evil leaves no evidence. Only one symbol remained on the main square, drawn on the ground. The sinister smile of Labubu. The forest always seemed like a safe place for Peppa's walks. But today, something felt terribly wrong. Strange glowing light pierced through the trees ahead. Peppa felt an unexplainable chill in the air. Curiosity overcame caution and growing fear inside her. Peppa slowly walked toward the light source. Behind a large oak tree, a glowing portal appeared. It pulsed with an ominous blue light. Familiar sounds echoed from the portal entrance. SpongeBob's laughter and friends' voices carried through. Peppa couldn't resist the overwhelming temptation to explore. She stepped directly into the glowing portal. The world on the other side looked familiar, but something was horribly wrong with everything. SpongeBob greeted her with a wide smile, but his eyes glowed with red light. Patrick stood nearby with an empty stare. His smile was too wide and creepy. All characters moved too slowly and mechanically. Their movements seemed unnatural and disturbing. SpongeBob offered Peppa to stay forever here. His voice sounded distorted and frightening. Peppa tried to return to the portal, but it had vanished without trace behind her. The sky grew darker with each passing minute. Stars turned into evil red eyes. Houses in Bikini Bottom looked completely destroyed. Windows glowed with ominous orange light. All town residents surrounded Peppa in circle. Their faces were twisted with evil grimaces. SpongeBob began laughing with mechanical laughter sound. The echo carried throughout the entire world. Peppa realized she was trapped in nightmare. This world was opposite of the real one. She tried to run away from crowd, but wherever she ran, they followed closely. Evil versions whispered strange words to her. Peppa couldn't understand their dark meaning. The world began slowly dissolving around her completely. Reality became increasingly more distorted. SpongeBob reached out his hand toward her. His fingers were sharp like razor blades. Peppa screamed and woke up at home. But a strange blue mark remained on her hand. She looked out window toward the forest. The ominous light still flickered there. The portal waited for her return patiently. SpongeBob smiled from the forest darkness. Peppa realized it wasn't just a dream. The evil world still called her back. Peppa Pig's house always seemed peaceful at night, but something sinister watched from the darkness outside. George lay in his bed, clutching Mr. Dinosaur tightly. A terrifying shadow appeared at his bedroom window. The green figure waved slowly at frightened George. Evil Shrek smiled with glowing red eyes menacingly. George trembled under his warm blanket covers. The monster gestured for him to come outside. Night after night, Shrek returned faithfully watching. George watched in terror from his bed. George ran to Peppa's room, crying desperately. She rolled her eyes at his silly stories. At breakfast, George told his worried parents. Daddy Pig laughed at the wild imagination. Mummy Pig patted George's head, gently smiling. Everyone thought he was just dreaming nightmares. Peppa teased George about his imaginary monster. She called him a silly little brother. Grandpa Pig visited for Sunday dinner together. George begged him to believe the truth. Even wise Grandpa shook his head sadly. Nobody took George's warnings seriously anymore. The waving continued every single dark night. Shrek's smile grew wider each time. George stopped telling anyone about the visits. Fear consumed his tiny pig heart completely. Dark circles appeared under George's tired eyes. He barely slept or ate anymore. Peppa noticed George acting very strange lately, but she ignored his frightened behavior completely. One stormy night, Shrek beckoned more urgently. His red eyes burned brighter than ever before. George felt an invisible force pulling him. He walked toward the bedroom window slowly. The window opened by itself, mysteriously wide. Cold wind rushed into the room violently. George climbed onto the windowsill very slowly. Shrek's hand reached out for him eagerly. Morning came, but George wasn't in bed. His bed remained empty and cold forever. Peppa found Mr. Dinosaur abandoned on floor. The toy pointed toward the open window. The family searched everywhere, desperately calling his name. But George had vanished without trace. Police found only muddy footprints outside house. They led into the dark forest depths. The house fell silent without little George. His empty chair haunted every meal sadly. Sometimes at night, Peppa hears strange sounds, someone waving at her bedroom window now. Peppa Pig's house always seemed like a safe place, warm and cozy. But today something changed in familiar atmosphere. Peppa and George were playing in living room when heard strange whisper from basement. Voice called their names, promising to show amazing toy. In corner of room appeared amber figure with spiders on body. Labubu smiled creepy smile. His eyes glowed with hypnotic light. Children felt irresistible desire to find this mysterious Labubu. They couldn't resist his call, as if under spell. Peppa and George went down to basement, following flickering traces. Steps creaked under their feet. Air became colder. In basement reigned impenetrable darkness, but amber glow showed way. Labubu lured children deeper into labyrinth of dark corridors. Basement walls covered with cobwebs, real spiders crawled from corners. They whispered to children which direction to go further. Peppa noticed exit disappeared behind them. Corridors changed, creating endless labyrinth with no way back. George tried calling Mummy, but his voice dissolved in darkness. Sounds didn't reach upper floor, as if darkness swallowed them. Labubu appeared right and left, always staying at distance. His amber body pulsed with ominous light in darkness. Children walked further, not understanding they fell into trap. Each step led them from real world into dimension of shadows. Air filled with buzzing of invisible insects. Spiders on Labubu's body came alive, weaving web around children. Peppa and George found themselves in huge cave, lit only by amber glow. Here time flowed differently, reality distorted. Labubu finally stopped before children. His smile became even wider, eyes burned with ancient evil. He explained children searched for him, now became part of his collection. In darkness appeared silhouettes of other missing children. Peppa and George realized they couldn't return home. They became prisoners of Amber Labubu in his dark realm. Upstairs, parents searched for children, but basement seemed ordinary. Nobody could find entrance to Shadow Dimension. Labubu showed children their new home, endless corridors where they would play forever. But these games brought no joy. Children turned into shadows of themselves, forever lost in labyrinth. Their laughter echoed through dark corridors. Amber Labubu returned to Upper World, leaving his figure in another house. He waited for new children who would want to find him. Basement darkness kept secret of vanished children. They forever remained in Shadow World where Amber Labubu rules. Peppa Pig's house always seemed like a safe place, warm and cozy. But none of its inhabitants suspected what dark secrets were hidden here. A strange toy appeared in the children's room. Labubu watched the sleeping children with red eyes. Peppa woke up from a terrible whisper. Labubu stood motionless by her bed. George reached for the mysterious toy. Labubu lured him with his sinister smile. A quarrel began between brother and sister. Each wanted to take Labubu for themselves. Mummy Pig heard the children's screams. Strange silence reigned in the room. Daddy Pig came to calm the little ones. Labubu disappeared as if dissolved into thin air. Grandpa Pig told scary stories about demons that hide in toys. Granny Pig noticed red traces. They led from the nursery to the attic. Madame Gazelle at kindergarten looked worried. She knew something about Labubu. Susie Sheep was afraid to play with Peppa. Labubu watched them from the darkness. Pedro Pony ran home in tears. Labubu showed him his true essence. Strange sounds began in the house at night. Labubu came alive and wandered the corridors. George disappeared from his bed. Labubu dragged him to the basement. Peppa searched for her brother everywhere. Red eyes watched her from every corner. A portal to another world opened in the basement. Labubu showed his demonic face. The family gathered to save George, but Labubu was stronger than them all. Grandpa Pig spoke an ancient spell. Labubu howled with rage and pain. The portal began pulling the demon back. Labubu clung to our world with claws. George returned to his family unharmed, but his eyes now glowed red. Labubu disappeared but left his mark. Eternal fear settled in the house. Peppa could no longer sleep peacefully. She knew the demon would return. The mirror reflected not George, but a little demon with red eyes. The family moved to a new house, but Labubu was already waiting for them there. A sunny day seemed perfectly ordinary and peaceful. George was riding his bright red bicycle along the familiar path near home. The wheels began to squeak loudly and unnaturally. The sound echoed through the empty street ominously, warning of something sinister. A strange yellow figure appeared from around the corner. It was Labubu with a frightening smile and glowing symbols in his eyes. Labubu approached without making any sound. His paws left yellow smoking traces on the dark asphalt below. George tried desperately to ride away, but the pedals spun by themselves. The bicycle wouldn't obey his commands anymore. Labubu extended his dark paw and whispered incomprehensible words. They sent a terrible chill down the spine. The sky darkened rapidly, though it was still morning. Dark clouds gathered ominously above them both. Peppa looked out the window and saw her brother with a stranger. Something about the scene was deeply frightening. She ran quickly to Daddy Pig, but when they returned, George had completely vanished. Only the bicycle remained. Labubu stood nearby and stared directly at the house. His yellow eyes glowed much brighter than before. Daddy Pig ran out frantically to search for his son. Labubu dissolved into thin air, leaving yellow smoke. George was found sitting in the basement. He sat there quietly, repeating strange, incomprehensible words. Mummy Pig tried to talk to him, but he looked right through her. Mysterious symbols reflected in his eyes. Dr. Brown Bear understood nothing at all. George was perfectly healthy, but behaved very strangely. At night, George went slowly to the window. Labubu waited there patiently, beckoning into the darkness. Peppa followed carefully as her brother opened the door. Labubu walked ahead into the night. They reached an old abandoned house. Labubu disappeared mysteriously inside the dark building. Strange, eerie sounds came from the house. George stepped across the threshold and vanished inside. Peppa ran for help, but the house was completely empty. A yellow medallion lay on the floor. George sat at home as if nothing had happened, but now he wore the mysterious medallion. Every night, Labubu appears under the window. He stands there and waits for his friend. George no longer plays with toys. He only stares out the window and whispers strange words. The family doesn't know what to do anymore. George remained with them, but changed forever.